Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be continuing to explore BT04 and updating some older decks from the older formats, and we definitely got a whole bunch of new and interesting tools that add a lot of extra depth and variety to these decks. So the deck in question today is going to be the Black Blockers deck. So Black Blockers is exactly as it sounds. The whole idea of the deck is basically you're just going to play a whole bunch of blockers, play Craniamon to make all of your blockers as powerful and hard to deal with as you possibly can, and just try to wall out the opponent while you're just slowly trying to aggress at the same time. So it's definitely a really interesting strategy, and thanks to the new Black starter deck and all of the cards in BT04, we get a whole bunch of new tools to think about, and there's definitely a lot that you could do with the deck. But going over the deck, starting with the Digitama, I'm going to be running one copy of Kakkinmon. So Kakkinmon is really good because we are going to be playing a couple of level 7s just because Black has access to the most amount of level 7s. So it only makes sense for us to run Kakkinmon because he has this great inheritable ability of when attacking once per turn. If this Digimon is level 7, then we get to gain 1 memory. So Black isn't exactly the most memory efficient of colors at this time, so anywhere we could gain some extra memory is definitely really nice. And then the main Digitama of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Kapurimon. So Kapurimon is really good for the deck just because he's interacting with the blocker ability, where he has the nice inheritable effect of during your turn, while this Digimon has blocker, it gains plus 1000 DP. So it's just your stereotypical DP booster, except the Digimon needs to be a blocker, but that's not necessarily a problem because we're running a whole bunch of different blockers in the deck. Next, on to the rookies, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gotsumon. So Gotsumon is still a really good card for the deck just because he is a rookie with the blocker ability, and we're already playing with a whole bunch of blocker synergy, so that just makes Gotsumon a really good card to be running. On top of which, he does have a when attacking ability of losing 2 memory, but most of the time we're not really going to be attacking the opponent unless we're going to be attacking them while they have no security, and then the losing 2 memory part doesn't matter because he's going to be the winning attack. So it's not like his downside is really that big of a deal. We just care about the fact that he is a rookie with the blocker ability. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of ToyAgumon. So this version of ToyAgumon is still really good and really important for the deck just because he has this powerful inheritable effect of giving the reboot ability. So for those who are unfamiliar with what reboot does, you basically get to unsuspend this Digimon during the opponent's unsuspend phase, and this is what's allowing you to just be aggressive and defensive at the same time. So that way, during your turn, you could swing with your higher end blockers, and then ToyAgumon here is going to give them reboot, so that way they stand up during the opponent's turn, and then they're able to block during the opponent's turn. So this ability just synergizes very nicely with the blocker ability, and is still a very solid ability to have. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Keramon. So this is the promo Keramon, and this Keramon is really good just because he has this nice inheritable effect of during the opponent's turn, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. So just note that the buff is during the opponent's turn, but that's pretty good considering we want our blockers to have as high stats as they possibly can to de-incentivize the opponent from attacking and to try to wall them out from various different Digimon, so making our Digimon as powerful as they possibly can, especially during the opponent's turn, is really, really valuable. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 2 copies of ToyAgumon. So this is the starter deck version of ToyAgumon, and this ToyAgumon is really good because of his inheritable effect of at the end of the opponent's turn, if the opponent's Digimon didn't attack, then you get to draw 1 card. So this is really good because if we're already stopping the opponent from wanting to attack, otherwise they're going to be losing their Digimon, then we get to have some form of card draw engine attached to that, and that's just pretty decent to be playing around with, considering Black doesn't necessarily have the best form of card draw. Next, on to the champions, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Numemon. So Numemon is in the deck for a couple of different reasons. The first big reason that he's in the deck is because he has a low evo cost, so that way we could digivolve him very efficiently. But on top of the fact that he has a low evo cost, he also has a relatively low play cost, so if we don't see any of our rookies, we don't feel as bad hard slamming a Numemon on the field, just because he has a really low play cost compared to a lot of other champions in the game. So those two elements combined just make him a very efficient card to run, so he's kind of acting as a pseudo-rookie that's also a champion. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Sealsdramon. So Sealsdramon is a pretty decent Digimon just because he is your stereotypical blocker. He has a play cost of 5, it digivolves for 2, 6000 DP, blocker ability with the attacking clause of losing 2 memory, so he is just fulfilling that same role that all of the other blockers in all of the other colors have. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Dark Tyrannomon. So this Dark Tyrannomon is fulfilling a very similar role to what Numemon and Sealsdramon is doing, except kind of combined. So this Digimon has a very low evo cost, making him very efficient and very easy to digivolve with. And then on top of that, he also has the blocker ability with the matching attacking clause that Sealsdramon has. So he's just another blocker that we have access to that we could use very efficiently. Next, onto the ultimates, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Giromon. So Giromon is basically doing the exact same thing as Keramon, where he has the exact same inheritable effect of during the opponent's turn, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP, except the only difference is this is on a ultimate level body and not a rookie level body, so you could stack up the abilities to get an even bigger buff during the opponent's turn, making your Digimon that much harder to deal with. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gogmamon. So Gogmamon is a pretty decent Digimon because he has 2 big abilities. His first big ability is he has the main ability of Digiburst 1, where you get to trash one of his Digivolution sources to trigger the following ability, which is one of your Digimon gets plus 2000 DP until the end of the opponent's next turn. So this is a buff that will last during your turn and the opponent's turn, so it's a pretty decent buff, and it could target any Digimon, so you could target a whole bunch of your other blockers or this Digimon and still get the buff and retain the buff, and that's just pretty decent to be thinking about just because of all of the different applications we could utilize this ability with. And then on top of that, he even has a really powerful inheritable effect where during all turns, this Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. So this is just another DP boost, except this is during all turns, where all of our previous DP boosts were only specifically during our turn or the opponent. So basically just a permanent plus 1000 on whatever we're digivolving him into is still just a very powerful thing to be doing. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Megadramon. So Megadramon is pretty good because he has this nice inheritable effect of giving whatever he's digivolving into the blocker ability. So the deck is, again, centered around blockers, so making sure that we could have as many or as powerful of blockers as we possibly can is definitely really, really nice, and making sure that we can give our Digimon that are higher level blocker that don't have it, just make our higher level Digimon that much more effective. Next, onto the Megas, I'm going to be running 2 copies of BryweLudramon. So BryweLudramon is a pretty decent Digimon for the deck just because he has this nice inheritable effect of giving whatever he digivolves into the blocker ability. So he is basically fulfilling the same role as Megadramon, where we are playing some level 7s and trying to make our level 7s have the blocker ability, so that way they could have as much synergy with the deck as they possibly can, is definitely something we really want to gain out of the card, and thus the primary reason on why we're running him. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Craniamon. So Craniamon is still the star of the black blocker deck just because of all the synergy he has with blockers as a whole. So he himself has the blocker ability, so he's already doing what the deck wants just by being a blocker, but on top of that, what makes him really shine for being like the commander of the blocker deck is the fact that he has this nice ability where during all turns, your Digimon with blocker cannot be deleted by the opponent's card effects. So he is adding some form of protection onto our Digimon, even though it's not covering all of the bases in terms of protection, because they could still be attacked into and deleted that way. They could still be bounced back to hand, returned to the bottom of the deck, and have their DP reduced. So there's still just a whole bunch of vulnerabilities to it, but the fact that we still have the ability to turn off the opponent from being able to delete our Digimon is still relatively strong and definitely worth running. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of BanchoGolemon. So this could really be any card you feel like you wanted it to be, but I just felt like for what the deck is trying to do, BanchoGolemon is definitely a really decent card to be playing around with, just because he, 1, has the blocker ability baked into him, so he just naturally comes with it, and all of the synergies that we are playing around with to support it. And then the second big thing is he has a nice ability where during the opponent's turn, while the opponent has 3 or more Digimon in play, then this Digimon gets plus 3000 DP. So this is pretty good considering he could potentially be on the opponent's turn a 14k DP Digimon, and then if we have any buffs stacked on top of him, he could be even stronger during the opponent's turn, allowing him to be a very efficient wall to stop the opponent from aggressing with a lot of their different Digimon. So if we stack him up with, let's just say, a Gogmamon or a Giromon, that'll make him at 15. And then if we have Keramon on top of that, then that'll make him a 16. So he's just a very powerful Digimon to be playing around with it just for that wall potential. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Omnimon Alter S. So Omnimon Alter S is just a very powerful level 7 that we have access to, and he just synergizes with the deck very nicely for a whole bunch of different reasons. The first big reason is he has a very powerful when digivolving ability, where we get to de-digivolve 1 on all of the opponent's Digimon, and then if any of those Digimon have 5000 DP or less, then we get to delete them all. So one of the big ways to counter a blocker strategy is for the opponent to just play more Digimon than we have blockers. Then they're just going to eventually overtake our blockers, and we can't stop enough damage. So having Omnimon Alter S basically act as a board clear to just try to counter or mitigate that strategy is definitely very, very powerful. And then on top of which, he has another ability of when attacking, where he basically can make himself unblockable for the turn by returning one of his level 6 Digivolution sources back to our hand. So this is just really good because this allows us to close out games very efficiently, and we could utilize this in some various different ways with some various different Digimon, just because we could stack them up with BryweLudramon to have blocker, but if we also have a Megadramon underneath him, then we have 2 instances of blocker, so we wouldn't really need that. So just being able to return one of them back to our hand is still just very, very nice, all depending on how we build them. And then on top of all of that, him just having 15k DP on base is still just very, very powerful on top of any of the other buffs that we could stack him with. So he's just a very powerful Digimon in his own right, and thus why we want to run him. And then the last Mega of the deck and the last level 7 of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Chaosmon. So Chaosmon is a very powerful Digimon for the style of deck to be playing around with, just because of his unique applications that he has with the deck. But Chaosmon has 2 really powerful abilities of his own. So first, he has the piercing keyword. So this is a really powerful keyword to be playing around with, just because piercing will make sure that we'll always be dealing security damage, whether blocked or not blocked, whether we're attacking into their security or their Digimon. It doesn't matter. The second he swings, we know we're going to be dealing security damage, which is just really good, especially if that's like the whole goal is to try to chip them out. Then Chaosmon having piercing will definitely ensure we're able to accomplish that. And then on top of that, he even has another really powerful when digivolving ability where we get to unsuspend this Digimon. Then it can attack your opponent's Digimon, and this effect allows you to attack into the opponent's unsuspended Digimon as well. So this is just really powerful because we basically get an extra swing when we digivolve up into him, and that extra swing is going to go at one of the opponent's Digimon, and the fact that it could go into an unsuspended Digimon means that we could pick a whole bunch of different Digimon we need to try to pick off, because most of the time if we're trying to wall the opponent out, they're going to have an unsuspended Digimon that they didn't want to attack with quite yet, so digivolving into Chaosmon will allow us to clear certain threats that we might not otherwise. So those 2 abilities play very nicely together, and then on top of that, We could stack Chaosmon in some very powerful ways to deal with a whole bunch of different potential threats. So we could stack him up with Blocker and Reboot, so he could gain the Blocker and Reboot abilities as well, on top of his Piercing, on top of him being able to attack when we Digivolve up into him. And then if we have any stat buffs on top of that, say like a Gogmamon or a Kapurimon, he could be a very powerful and very devastating Digimon that's even able to clear out the great Omnimon. So he just, again, is a very powerful Digimon that's being very aggressive and is a very good card to be running with the deck. And then, unfortunately, I didn't exactly have enough room for any option cards, but Black doesn't have the best option cards anyway, so I'm just going to skip straight to the Tamers, and I'm going to be running 3 copies of Tai. So this is the Black Tai from BT02, and he's pretty decent just because he is the memory fixing tamer of the deck. And then on top of the fact that he's the memory fixer, during the opponent's turn, all of our Black Digimon get plus 1000 DP. So the plus 1000 DP is, again, making them that much harder to deal with, and it is only affecting our Black Digimon, so the only Digimon in the entire deck that's not affected by this are our level 7s, but they're strong enough to the point where I don't think we really care about giving our level 7s plus 1000 on the opponent's turn. But regardless, just Black Tai is doing a lot of work for basically every other Digimon in our deck, and that's why we're running him. And then the last tamer and last card of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Joe. So this is the Black Joe from BT03, and he's in here just because he has some really good blocker synergy, where at the start of our turn, if we have a Digimon with blocker in play, then we get to gain 1 memory. So this is just an easy way of gaining additional memory, and it's just pretty decent just because we have a whole bunch of different blockers, and he has a really low play cost, making him just a very efficient tamer to run. And then, as I mentioned before, there's just so many other cards that you could think about running in the deck that it's actually a little bit daunting. So you could run something like Tsunorizumon to gain some additional keywords and be able to deal some additional damage. If you want just another generic blocker, then the Agumon that comes from the Black starter deck is pretty good. I just prefer the 3000 DP over the 1000 DP, which is why I'm running Gotsumon instead of Agumon, but you're more than welcome to pick and choose which one you want to run, or you could run both. Then you have access to some other really good champions, so you could think about running the whole BT02 Greymon line, just because the Reboot synergy is really good to be playing around with because it synergizes nicely with Blocker. So Greymon here will give our Reboot Digimon jamming. Then you could also think about playing the Greymon from the starter deck, just because he has a very similar ability to ToyAgumon, where he's basically acting as a good draw engine for the opponent not having any of their Digimon attack during their turn. And then on top of that, you could also think about running Giromon as just another generic blocker. I didn't include Giromon just because he does have a attacking clause that he can't attack, which definitely isn't the best because sometimes we are caught in the situations where he might be the only Digimon in play and we want to aggress and we can't. Then on top of him, we also have some other blockers that we could possibly think about, like Andromon or Edamon, where they're just decent level 5 blockers. You could also just think about running Metal Greymon, just because him having Reboot already is pretty good, because paired up with Greymon means that he's going to be gaining the jamming ability. And then on top of that, he also is going to be potentially giving our Digimon Security Attack +1 if they have Reboot, allowing them to deal more damage. If you're already running the whole line, it just makes sense to run the War Greymon, just because he has both Blocker and Reboot innately, so he just turns all of those synergies online. Then you could be running something like a Machinedramon if you want to play a little bit more into a Megazoo aspect, because he has the blocker ability innately, so again, he just is a Mega level blocker. And then on top of that, he has a very powerful on-play ability of de-digivolving 2 on up to 2 of the opponent's Digimon, thus making it harder for them to aggress because we're shrinking their Digimon down. Then, if you're already playing with a lot of the Reboot cards, Giromon is another good card to be playing around with, just because he has the Reboot ability natively. And then on top of that, because we are a wall-style deck that doesn't have a lot of removal for the opponent's Digimon, we could also utilize his ability more effectively, just because he gets more possible targets to pick from in terms of spawning another Digimon on our field. Then, if we just want another card to be really aggressive, we could think about running Blastmon, just because Blastmon forces the opponent to lose their Digimon, or they're going to be taking lots of damage, and we could pair this up with Tsunorizumon and some of our other cards to just make Blastmon a very powerful Digimon in his own right. Then, we also have access to a whole bunch of other Mega level Digimon that we could possibly think about running, depending on how you want to build the deck. So again, if you want to play more into that Megazoo style, you could utilize Volcanicdramon for its board wipe potential and digivolve that into Alter S right afterward, or you could think about utilizing Durandamon to give our Megas piercing, because he also can digivolve off of black. And then if we are just going in a more Megazoo style direction with our black blockers, we could run something like Ragnalordmon, because we are already running BryweLudramon. You could think about utilizing Millenniumon, just because the when digivolving to just remove one of the opponent's Digimon and put it to the bottom of the deck is very powerful, because it can bypass a lot of defenses. And then on top of that, he has a nice on-delete ability, where if he's deleted, then he basically gets to res himself. So pair that up with the blocker ability, and he is just a very sticky card that can be very hard to deal with. And then as far as like some of the best options that we have access to, one of them is going to be Breath of the Gods. And then the other really powerful option we could be playing around with is Final Zubagon Punch. If you want to run a different memory fixing tamer, we do have access to Izzy, where he is pretty decent because he also has a nice on-play ability to just try to help fix the top of our deck and potentially gain us a memory for doing that. And then if you wanted to, you could also think about running the Black Tai Kamiya from the starter deck, just because he does have some good blocker synergy and he's another very cheap and efficient tamer. And then you could even splash in a little bit of red if you really wanted to run a small red package. Then you could start thinking about running something like Trident Revolver to try to help play your Tamers for free and delete one of the opponent's Digimon with a 6000 DP or less. Then you also have the red Agumon that helps dig for your Tamers by checking the top 5 and adding any Tamer among them to your hand. And then if you're already running red, you could also just be thinking about running Gaia Force, just because like it's Gaia Force. It's one of the best removal options in the game. And that's just scratching the surface on all of the potential different ways you could build and modify the deck. So it's definitely a really fun and interesting deck to be building around, just because of, again, all of its potential and tools. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, I'll have the deck listed down in the description below, and feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.